All right, everyone, thank you very much again for joining Group IB's webinar today, Cobalt Group Persists. So my name is Nicholas Palmer. I'm the Director of Key Customer Accounts at Group IB. And I'm also joined together with my colleague Dmitry Volkov. He's the head of our Threat Intelligence Division.
Hello.
So just a couple of housekeeping items. So if you see in the bottom right hand, there's a questions column. So if you have any questions as we go through the webinar, feel free to ask them, and we'll try and work it into the presentation if we can. If we can't, then we'll have a Q&A session at the end of today's webinar. So I hope everyone can see my screen. If you can't, just type me a question, and we'll try to get everything arranged. So let's get started here for today's webinar. So during today's webinar, what we intend to talk about is some of the key trends that we've seen in previous years in cybercrime as it relates to trending towards targeted attacks. Moreover, we'll provide an overview of some of the different targeted attack groups that Group IB monitors, as well as give you guys a refresher of Cobalt's activities to date, but also some of the major changes that we've seen in this targeted attack group. They've matured in a lot of different ways, and we're excited to share some of the things that we've been tracking together with this group. A lot of the attendees on today's webinar are actually Group IB's clients, but I see a number of different names that I don't recognize. So I think it's important to mention some of the different areas that Group IB operates in, specifically related to how Group IB acquires their intelligence, so you know how we track these different groups. And I'll talk about just a couple of the important aspects of Group IB's products and services that contributes to our intelligence. Not only Dmitry and his smart team, but also we have infrastructure that supports our threat intelligence team. So we have one of the largest digital forensics laboratories here in Eastern Europe, and very, very talented reverse engineers on our team to support our forensics responders and new type of samples that they might see, and reversing those and understanding how they operate. We also have one of the only commercial certs operating in Russia, Cert GIB, so they help us to identify any phishing websites, investigate them, look at different drop email accounts that are used by cyber criminals, and lots of other good intelligence in that. And another important aspect of Group IB intelligence is actually this product here. This is called Group IB TDS, and it's part of our early warning system of products. This is Group IB's network security appliance, and it's the appliance that protects our client's network from intrusion. So we also have a sandbox environment that goes with that product, and we see a lot of good information about targeted attacks that attempt to take place and to intrude in our clients' networks. So those are some of the different ways that we collect our intelligence, but of course doing incident response and forensics response into some of these targeted attacks has been critical for Group IB in gaining this intelligence. So now that that's over, let's get into the webinar in a little bit more detail, and we'll look at some key trends in cybercrime in the last couple of years. So this chart really looks at key trends from Q2 in 2014 and Q1 of 2015, and the same time in 15 and 16. And as you see from the graph here, really the largest portion of threats and financial losses to companies that we've seen was via online banking in 14 and 15, with the second largest portion being towards targeted attacks on banks. In 2015 and 16, and certainly continuing until now, we see the number and certainly the financial losses to organizations from targeted attacks really becoming more significant. Really, cybercriminal and targeted attack groups are becoming very sophisticated in nature, and they're maximizing their return on investment by conducting targeted attacks against organizations. So it's certainly a trend that we've seen. And this next slide looks at some of the different targeted attack groups and their timelines of operation. Obviously, the very well-known Anunak and Carbonak operating between 2013 up until January of 2015, really operating for a short period of time, but a large financial loss to organization, about 1 billion rubles in financial losses to organizations. And this particular group targeted a number of different areas within the financial institution, including ARM, CBR. This is the SWIFT analog here in Russia. targeting SWIFT as well as payment gateways, card processing systems, and ATM systems. And after Anunak, also known as Carbonac, stopped their activities, we saw Corco come into the market and operate until 2015, September of 2015. And they were really famous for their successful attack against trade terminals. And they had an attack here in Russia that resulted in the currency valuation fluctuating here of ruble against the dollar in about 10%. So it was a pretty significant targeted attack, and we have a very nice report that we can share about that as well. Bootstrap and Lurk operating until Bootstrap's money launderer's arrest in about April of 2016, and they targeted specifically ARM CBR, or the SWIFT analog here in Russia. So after these groups kind of ceased their activities, although it's interesting to note that we now see Bootstrap's malware being reused. We believe it's by other groups, but we do see this happening again, so that's interesting to note. So after this group stopped their activities, we saw Cobalt in June of 2016 is when they were detected really start to conduct targeted attacks against financial institutions, and specifically against ATM systems within the bank, although we've seen them shift to other areas of interest like card processing systems. And most recently, we've uncovered some discussions in Jabber and other communications about targets and interest towards SWIFT payment system for the Cobalt group. And of course, well known at Money Taker, also known as Fin7, Group IB has very close insights into this group and have confirmed attacks in the UK and the US. So if you're interested to learn more about our knowledge about Fin7, which I know is of interest to a lot of the people on the line, you can contact myself or Dimitri, and we can talk about that in private after. So let's get into a little bit more about Cobalt, a little bit of a refresher. Here is the Cobalt report, the research that Dimitri's team did into the original ATM attacks that we saw. And this group activity started in June of 2016 on the conclusion of Bootstrap's activities, the arrest of their money laundering gang. And it was a very active July and August after the first confirmed attack on a Russian bank, targeting and sending spear phishing emails to a number of banks in the UK and the EU, as well as here in Russia, and then more confirmed attacks that happened in September of 2016. So that was kind of the original timeline that we looked at for the Cobalt group and a lot of their activities. So it was a very active summer last summer, to say the least. So what happened after that, I think you might remember from maybe the webinar last time if you joined us, but we were lucky enough to have a hit on our hunting rules for the malware sample that was used in the Taiwan incident, and we were lucky enough to have a hit on that. And it allowed us to analyze the code that was used in the first bank in Taiwan to the case that we did an incident response on in Europe. And it was really interesting to identify identical code that was used to record dispensing results into an unencrypted file in both cases, and very simple protection mechanisms, only launching month checks before the files were launched. Also very interesting to note in the European case and the case in Taiwan were the error messages that were shown for dispense requests. And there were a lot of mistakes that are very frequent for Russian speakers who have English as a second language in some of the errors that were in the dispensing results in the malware cases. So that was an interesting discovery for Group IB after some of the initial events. So after the busy summer that we had, Group IB was, again, maybe very lucky, maybe very skilled, but we managed to get actually a copy of the email servers that were used to send spear phishing emails, Cobalt spear phishing emails, in December of 2016. And on review of the logs, we were actually able to identify new targets that the Cobalt group had sent spear phishing emails to. In total, in the logs that we reviewed, there were over 2,000 different spear phishing emails, and that were sent from August 2016, so after that busy summer that we experienced, and over 142 additional targets distributed around the world. So that was a very interesting discovery for our group. If you recall from the initial report that we did, and their Cobalt strategy hasn't changed much in terms of the targeted attack methodology that they use, except for perhaps maybe number 5, targeting ATM systems within the bank. We've seen them enhance some of the spear phishing emails that they've used, and we'll talk later on about that in today's webinar, for the initial infection vector, which has always been spear phishing emails, and I think with a lot of targeted attacks that take place, this remains true as the initial infection vector. After this, they acquire remote access to gain total control over the network, and followed by, of course, escalating privileges with Mimikatz. We've seen the group use different versions of Mimikatz, different shellcode in that for gaining privileges now instead of standard Mimikatz, and that's certainly an advancement in their activities. Step number 4 is always data collection, so learning which different systems of interest are for them. We've seen certainly some advancements in the methods that they use now, and we'll talk later on about that. Number 5, we mentioned focusing on different aspects of the bank. We've seen, like I mentioned, different communications indicating interest from the Cobalt group into SWIFT lately, and we have confirmed events of attacks against payment processing systems, which we'll also talk about later. Step number 6 for the group is always to complicate the investigation, to try and remove as many traces in the system as possible connected to their activities, and really complicate the forensics investigation for security firms that do it. So that's kind of the steps and the different scheme for the Cobalt group in conducting their attack. And we'll focus on some of the changes later on in today's presentation. This next slide, really, I want to give some sort of acknowledgement to one of the forensics responders that does a lot of the incident response connected to the Cobalt group, and that's Vesta Medvedev here at Group IB, and she recently wrote a blog post. You can see that on Group IB's blog. It's a technical report about Group IB's different targeted attack templates, some of their principles in the targeted attacks. She'll also talk about modifications to spear phishing emails, different techniques that they've used to improve malware survivability, strategies to avoid antivirus detection and network security controls. So it's a very interesting blog post, and I'd recommend that you go and read that after today's webinar as a little bit of support to the webinar here today. One of the things to remember, just kind of as a refresher, in the initial attacks that Cobalt did, one of the things that they did was leverage kind of an error in the configuration of group policy preferences. So any organization that's using group policy preferences, the Cobalt group actually tried to look for the groups.xml file on the domain controller. And the reason that they did this is to be able to actually identify the username and password combination of administrators within that domain. Of course, it's encrypted here. You can kind of see an example of what it would look like to the Cobalt group as they acquired the encrypted credentials. But actually, the decryption tool that was used by the Cobalt group is the default decryption tool is actually located publicly available on the Microsoft website. So this was something that was certainly very interesting and something to be aware of if you're using group policy within your environment. So something to remember. So now let's look at some of the new things that Cobalt's doing. One of the things that we've seen them do is really try and enhance the success rate at which their spear phishing emails are delivered. And in February of 2016, we actually saw the group conduct an attack against a Russian integrator. And the reason that they did this was to actually send their spear phishing emails from this integrator's mail servers to have a higher success rate and really leverage the sender policy framework at the organizations that they were interested in targeting. So that was a very interesting case that we did an incident response on, and we have confirmed events that the group is now trying to leverage other mail servers from partner organizations to send their spear phishing emails to targets of interest for them. What else has been interesting from the groups? I mentioned new targets. Not only is Cobalt interested in ATM systems, but we also have confirmed events where they have targeted payment processing systems. We did an incident response in Kazakhstan in February of 2017, where again spear phishing emails were sent acting as Diebold Nixdorf, the ATM manufacturer. The criminals gained access to this bank in Kazakhstan's network. They had RDP protocol and administration rights during October and November after their entry in September. And what they did then was try to access the payment processing system within the bank, which in this case was the Belgium payment processor Wayfor. At the same time, the group actually opened up legitimate accounts and cards within the bank so that they could go into the payment processing system and actually remove the withdrawal limits on these legitimate cards. And in this case, the group was successful at withdrawing over $500,000 from this specific bank in Kazakhstan. You can imagine that there's very significant cash out benefits, as they're withdrawing theoretically, not legally, but the withdrawal limits are removed from these cards, so there's no kind of triggers that are shone off originally when the group goes to conduct their attack. So it was a very interesting move away from ATM systems when they saw them, when Group IB did this incident response and understood that the group was targeting more than ATM systems. And here on the right, I think Dimitri and certainly I want to notify you that we've seen Cobalt Group recently discussing through Jabber Communications interest in targeting SWIFT systems. We don't have any confirmed events as of now of this happening, but we do know that the group is interested in looking at SWIFT, and certainly given their successful attacks against ATM and payment processing system, if they're in the network and have enough time, certainly this is a possibility and something to look out for. So now let's talk a little bit about some of the maturity of the group. And this really comes into an incident response that Group IB conducted in July of 2017, where we conducted an incident response and identified a number of different attacks against organizations in Eastern Europe. Here you can see some of the countries that were affected. And in this round of attacks, they implemented a new instrument to help them with network intrusion. And we'll talk a little bit more about how this event shows some of the maturing level of the targeted attack group in general. So the first way that we see them maturing is the way that they're sending their spear phishing emails. The first one that they're doing is they're having new exploits in their spear phishing emails. They're trying new things. They're trying to be more successful at the way that they deliver their spear phishing emails using partner organizations. Another one that we've seen is we've seen different languages implemented in their spear phishing emails. We've now seen English, Russian, and in this most recent event that we saw, Italian languages in their spear phishing emails. And this is indicative to us that there's potentially new targets out there for Cobalt Group, and they're extending their activities into other regions. Some of the initial spear phishing emails weren't really realistic looking, or sometimes didn't have much content at all in these spear phishing emails. But here you see one of the spear phishing emails from the last case that we're talking about here, and it's very graphically pleasing. And if actually you read some of the language there, it looks legitimate in some of the way that the English flows on that document. So we see the crafting of the spear phishing emails becoming much more legitimate and looking and designed. Perhaps the group is employing some native speakers of other languages to really become better at delivering their spear phishing emails. Number 4 is that we've seen the group actually targeting not only corporate email addresses with their spear phishing emails, but also the personal emails of employees of banks that they're interested in targeting. So that's interesting to look at, to try and think of why they're doing this and getting into the personal computers of organizations. Perhaps they want to avoid network security appliances or advanced security controls that you have within the bank, and hide out on personal computers to try to access emails and other things of information. But it was definitely interesting to see them do this. One of the other important pieces of information, and definitely a key indicator of attack, is that the Cobalt Group is still using the same mail delivery system to send their spear phishing emails. And in this case, it's iPochta. which is interesting to note and still a key indicator of attack for people on the line to listen to be on the lookout for. I'm just going to close the webinar here in case there's any questions, because I didn't, yeah, there's not. Perfect. So let's continue on here to the next slide. So another unique element to what Cobalt's doing, and certainly becoming more advanced in the tools that they're using. In all cases that we've seen, Cobalt's now using a unique JS backdoor, and also employing PowerShell for delivery of malware, delivery of Mimikatz and other tools that they use to escalate privileges. Also with malware propagation, it enhances that. They're using PowerShell to compromise different accounts on the domain and also launch their Cobalt beacon. And this has been very interesting. And looking at the unique JS backdoor, this really has resulted in a higher delivery rate as the payload is not actually in the spear phishing emails anymore. It also has given them unique capabilities to launch Cobalt Beacon when the attackers are ready. And they've done a lot to enhance their ability in the Recon phase, and we'll show you that actually on the next slide. They've also done some interesting things with complications for forensics investigation, but JS backdoor certainly complicates the investigation for incident responders, as all attacks are done in memory now. So let's talk about maturing in the Recon phase a little bit. So in this particular event that we looked at, Cobalt Group actually employed a new Recon module that communicates back to the CNC server in encrypted fashion. Here you can see some of the communication back in the encrypted format that it was in. But it's interesting to note some of the different Recon module capabilities that it has and that Cobalt Group is looking for. So they're collecting information about the OS of the endpoint that they're looking at, the OS serial number. They're looking at what type of antivirus software is installed on that endpoint, and other information is collected as well during this Recon phase. And we haven't seen that before in other targeted attacks from this group. Additionally, in this Recon module, it has the ability to execute different commands. So some of the commands include download and executing different commands, downloading new SCT scripts. Interesting choice of words here, to delete the traces from the system with this command here. Another command to launch new SCT scripts, and another one to execute different binary commands. So it's very interesting to see in this targeted attack that took place the maturity in some of the Recon phase to actually identify systems of interest for the group before launching Cobalt Beacon to try and remain as undetected as possible in the network before conducting attacks. Another element that we've seen Cobalt Group really mature is the way that they've started to complicate investigations. In attacks that took place in February of 2017, the attackers actually cleaned out log events using Kaspersky remote installed tool crypter out.exe, and here you can actually see when the victim was shown what type of crypto message that they were shown here. And it's very interesting to note that actually the crypter was a modified version of Petya ransomware, and these events certainly took place before all of the NotPetya events that were so publicly known. So that was very interesting to note in this particular type of attack. So the last slide that I think will leave you before the Q&A session today is that the group is still active. Group IB has actually conducted new incident responses as early as August 7th of last week. Geez, the weeks fly by. So we know that the group is still very active. We see their maturity really increasing in the tools that they're using, in the way that they're having the reconnaissance phase, in the way that they're trying to complicate the investigation, and we certainly see them looking at other systems of interest, especially SWIFT systems. So that's a very interesting case for us. So if you're interested to learn more about some of the latest indicators of attack or different TTPs that Group IB discovers from the Cobalt group, if you're not already a subscriber of Group IB Intelligence or you'd like to learn more about how to do that, we publish all of the reports and incident responses that we do into the Cobalt group into our Group IB Intelligence portal. So you can certainly contact myself or the marketing group to learn more about that after today's webinar. So let's finish there, and we'll open up for a Q&A session. And Dimitri and I will pause here and just wait for some of your questions to come in.
And while we're waiting for questions, let me clarify some more points. So let me explain why we switched the intention from ATM attacks to payment systems. Now we're looking to ability to attack SWIFT systems. And also we see that we successfully targeted a company here in Russia where the victim was actually not a bank, but a processing company with doing small amount of transactions, like I think the right analog in the United States was like Western Union. So why we switch from ATM to payment systems? First of all, every time we saw in chatters between offer of malicious programs and the guys who were responsible for money laundering, every time we successfully get access to any bank, we have problems to identify where is the physical location of every ATM. For every ATM, we had to compile a new version of malicious programs, upload it to every ATM, and it's a manual process. In case of payment attacks on payment systems, we don't have such problems. We don't care where is the ATM card located. We don't need to deliver any software on the ATMs. We don't have problems with offer of malicious programs and etc. What else? The guy who is actually is the offer of ATM malware, he's currently restricted access to his malicious programs. He's not allowing to conduct attacks against Russian-speaking countries using these malicious programs. Of course, guys who's dealing with him usually find a way to use it in different Russian-speaking countries, but we offer currently don't like when we're doing it in Russia, for instance, because of self-security. Moving back to self-security, when we attack the ATM, the guy who was responsible for money laundering, sometimes we were successfully arrested at the moment on getting cash from the ATM machine. When we targeted payment system, we were able to withdraw money in any other countries outside of attacked bank. So let's imagine that the attacked bank was in Russia or in Kazakhstan or maybe in Ukraine or Germany, doesn't matter. The guys who were responsible for money laundering, they could move to United Kingdom, to Romania, to United States, to Canada, and do the withdrawal in that countries. And it means that the local security team cannot react on the incident really fast. We cannot get in touch with local law enforcement, ask to provide some new information from video cameras in the place of location of the ATM, and of course provide some more details about the attack to local law enforcement to make the arrest procedures really fast. And in terms of payment gateways, so it was not just a payment system, but the payment gateway, when we speak about small transactions like to fulfill the balance of a phone number or transfer about 10, maybe $50 on a credit card. There are some companies like Western Union and many other similar companies. Of course, we have Russian analogs here in Russia. And what we did, we get access to such payment gateways and look into the log files of these payment gateways. We were able to understand what is the current format of sending a request to transfer money. Of course, confirming it with security tokens, with API key, and etc. I mean, other security measures that were implemented in the tech company. And we copied this attack vector from the Anunnaki group, who actually was the first who used to attack such companies 4 years ago.
Thanks for that addition, Dimitri, to the discussion. I appreciate the clarification for everyone on the line. And we have a question, actually. So the question is, do you believe that JS Backdoor is exclusive to Cobalt Group, or do you think it's something that they acquired? So Dimitri, maybe you can weigh in on that one.
Well, it's not an easy question. Actually, everything that we're using at the moment, I mean, exploit kits, spear phishing system to deliver, new encryption tools, all these things, and of course, ATM malware were acquired from the market. But let's speak about ATM tool, about JS backdoor. All these tools were developed by someone, but it was exclusive tool, used at the current moment only by one cybercriminal groups. In this case, it's good for us because it's easy now to do attribution, because in the past we've seen many other cybercriminals used Cobalt Strike or MetaPredator, for instance, and it was when we see just a Cobalt Strike, we were unable to do attribution really fast. We need to analyze more details. In case of unique JS backdoor, it helps us a lot because we see what is unique, but it make the computer forensic process and incident response processes more complicated. Because we don't have files on the systems, we don't infect systems that are not very interested for them. The reconnaissance step, of course, very important to avoid detection by security companies, like we are, and of course others.
Great, thanks very much, Dimitri, for answering that question. We'll take any other Q&As that you might have, or we'll give you a Q&A. So Dimitri and I will hang on the line here for a little while. If you'd like a copy of today's webinar, you can feel free to email me here, and we'll send you out a copy if you'd like that, or if you'd like to learn more about some of the research projects that Dimitri and his team are doing. We can tell you about those as well. So please, if you have questions, just ask, and Dimitri and I will be here to address them. There's one more question here. Actually, Dimitri just went to get his laptop to check some timestamps for another question that came in. But one of the questions from the audience is that what is the total economic impact that you'd attribute to the Cobalt group? And I think that's really a complicated question to look at. I mean, not all targeted attacks that take place are public knowledge, and Group IB actually, although we wish we haven't conducted all the forensics responses to these incidents. Certainly the group has been as skilled as other targeted attack groups that we've seen, so we can put their financial losses in a similar category as what we'd expect from the other groups, but I think that's a difficult question to put an exact dollar figure on the total economic impact from this targeted attack group. And I'll just wait for Dimitri to come back and address one of the other questions from the audience. If you have others, please let us know, and we'd be happy to answer.
So where was
So there was another very interesting and specific question from the audience about when was the earliest time that we saw JS backdoor being employed, and the first time that we saw that was actually the beginning of July. We saw the first traces of that before different incident response activities. So that's when we first saw it. I'm interested about your comments on that as well, if you'd like to email me privately and we can have a discussion. All right, thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. I hope it was of value for you. Dimitri and I will stick on the line for a couple of more minutes just in case there's other questions that you'd like to ask, or you can ask them to us privately and we could be a little bit more open in the responses that we have. So thank you everyone for joining today's webinar.